And how you guys doing? Everybody doing all right? All right. People seem tired. I don't know why. Maybe you stayed up late. Now, I'm not a Cubs fan. Yeah, okay. Pray for me, I guess. My father is a Sox fan. I was raised as a Sox fan. My mother is a Cubs fan, so, half of us, I guess, are good. And my dad has this illustration. This has nothing to do with the sermon yet, but I just thought we'd get this out of the way because it's on your mind, right? Cubs fans, we're happy for you, okay? But my dad explains it this way, and I think it's perfect. We're happy for you in the same way when you go to somebody's birthday party and you watch them open gifts. You're really happy for them, but it doesn't affect you at all. So I watched the game last night, not because I like the Cubs, but my wife does, and I like my wife. And so I also stayed up late. My voice is a little groggy. I wasn't cheering, so don't confuse that. I don't know why. Just things seem to be going around right now, and so pray for me. I'm a little congested. Gabe was congested. Matt, thank you for stepping up this morning and leading worship for us. That was last minute, and so we're thankful for our worship team leading us. Thank the Lord for His Word. That we have the Word of God to speak into our lives, to give us assurance no matter what we're going through. And we've been looking at the book of Genesis, and we've studied this book for nearly a year now. And we've been seeing that Genesis it's a book about God's plan to redeem and rescue and restore His good creation that was broken and destroyed by sin. That God, only by His grace and love, chose, before the foundation of the earth was even created and laid out, that if His creation were to rebel, He would not just let it go, but He would love His people in a way that He would go to great lengths to save them. And we've been studying this single family, the family of Jacob, the family that God would choose to fulfill His plan through. And we've been focusing on Jacob's 12 sons, and in particular, one of the sons named Joseph. This is a peculiar family that God has chosen to use. This family would eventually lead to the nation of Israel, that would eventually lead to the birth of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And yet this family that God has chosen is far from perfect. Can we agree about that? Jacob's family is pretty jacked up, right? I mean, do I need to remind you, even Joseph's life, the one that we've been focusing on, there's so much brokenness and failure and hurt and betrayal just in this one man. You'll remember Jacob, the father of the family of faith, the father of the family that God chose to use, favored one of his sons, Joseph, above the others. We're going to see how that favoritism even carried over to Joseph's brother Benjamin. Joseph, then, because he was favored by his father, was despised by all of his brothers. His brothers hated him for it. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Joseph's brothers didn't hate Jacob for favoring Joseph. Who did they hate? Joseph for being favored. Isn't that weird? Why would that be? Well, they were jealous of their brother. They wanted to be the favored ones. And they hated him for it. So much so that they were planning on killing him, but one of Joseph's big brother, Judah, decided to come up with a plan to sell Joseph into slavery to the Ishmaelites, who eventually took him down to Egypt, a very pagan country. And it was in Egypt that Joseph was sold into the house of Potiphar, and it was in his house that Joseph was falsely accused and thrown into prison, where he would spend nearly a decade wasting away his 20s. A time where men would grow and would get families and build legacies. Joseph was sitting in a prison, waiting on God. His family, there's so much brokenness in this family, and yet what amazes us over and over again is that despite the flaws of this family, God can and still does use them. You see, God eventually raised Joseph up to a place of power in Egypt where he would use him to save and bless not only the entire nation of Egypt, but all the surrounding nations, including the one that his brothers and his family belonged. We began looking at last week this story of reconciliation, how God was working all things for his glory and for the good of this family and for the good of the people around. And he brought about some reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers. Through God's sovereign plan, he worked out to bring his brothers before Joseph, before the one that they betrayed. And he was going to bring Joseph not only forgiveness between him and his brothers, but reconciliation. And so we saw last week that in order to have forgiveness, all you need is a confession. You need an admittance of guilt before someone. But in order to have reconciliation, you need time and you need trust. What we're going to see this morning is that God is going to eventually give Joseph this trust, and he's going to have closure with his brothers. Not only will Joseph have closure, but he'll provide his brothers comfort. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that as we hear about the story of this family and we see the brokenness, we can relate, we can share in it, can't we? You say, hey, listen, Joseph's family isn't the only one that's jacked up, and Joseph's life isn't the only one that's kind of messed up. I've had some things go on in my life. I've experienced some brokenness. I've experienced some failure. I've experienced some hurt. I've experienced some betrayal. I've felt some of the things that he has felt. Maybe I wasn't a slave in Egypt, but things here aren't so good. And it's very easy, if we're honest, as we look at the hopelessness and the brokenness that's around us and inside of us, that we tend to get discouraged. But this morning, I want you to see something. This morning from Genesis chapter 44 and 45, here's kind of the big thing. When God reconciles his people, he doesn't just forgive them, but he restores them. With reconciliation comes restoration. What I mean is this: when God saves someone, he doesn't just save them, but he makes them brand new. When God forgives someone, he doesn't just forgive them, but he comforts them and reassures them. When God makes things good, he also makes things whole and complete. Now, that might not make sense now, but we're going to see it in Genesis 44, in Joseph's life, and then I want to show you how it's true in ours. So let's pick up Genesis 44, chapter 44, verse 1. I told you it was a rough morning. 44, verse 1. The brothers are on their second trip back to Egypt. They're coming back to get food. This time they've brought their youngest brother, Benjamin, the only full-blooded brother of Joseph. They're bringing him back. Do you remember that? Judah convinced Jacob to allow Benjamin to go with him. They're going back down to Egypt. Their brother Simeon is in jail, on hold, on layaway, all right, for them, and they're bringing payment. Joseph is going to give them one final test before he is reconciled with them. He's going to give them one final test before he trusts the brothers. And if they're sorry, then they can be reconciled and restored. Let's look at verse 1. Then he, that's Joseph, commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest. All right, who's the youngest? Benjamin. All right, with his money for the grain, and he did just as Joseph told him. All right, so Joseph tells his steward, hey, put the grain that they came to buy, put that in, on their donkeys, all right? Fill up their food. Give them as much food as you possibly can. But also give them their money back. All right, you remember he did this once before, right? You remember this last week? All right? Basically, he's giving them the food for free. But this time he says, take my cup, my silver cup, and put it in the bag of who? Benjamin, youngest brother. And the steward did just as he told him. Verse 3, as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this. All right, what do we call this? A setup. You ever been set up before? It's painful, right? People want an outcome, but they don't tell you that outcome, and so they trick you. My daughter just did this to me. She set me up. I take her on daddy-daughter dates sometimes. And I was taking her to Five Below, and she really didn't want to go to Five Below because, she's like way too upscale in her taste. Because my daughter knew if you pass Five Below in Highland, you have to drive by a big red sign. Does anyone know what that big red sign is with the dot in the middle? Target, right? And so I was taking her to Five Below, and we were driving past Target, and all of a sudden she goes, Daddy, 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 I have to go to the bathroom. And I said, well, baby, we'll be in Five Below for like 2 minutes, and then we'll go home, and you can use the bathroom there. She's like, no, I have to go really bad, and Five Below does not have a bathroom. And I said, all right, fine, we'll just stop in Target real quick. So we stopped in Target, and you know what that girl did? We got unbuckled, inside, to the bathroom, and she goes, I don't have to go anymore. Can we go check out the toys? And I said, no, we're going home. All right, she set me up. She had no intention on going to the bathroom. She had every intention of going to the toy section, not just the toy section, but the toy section in Target. Set up, man. Can't be a parent without getting set up, right? But more seriously, sometimes people do this. Maybe at work, or maybe even your own family, people set you up to fail. And it seems like Joseph is setting his brothers up to fail, but he's using his cup. This was a silver cup. It was kind of like, I know this isn't going to relate to everybody, but I only think of little John and his cup. It's like 3 of you aren't going to know what I'm talking about. I was going to put a picture up, but you'd just be weirded out. But I just think of little John. Like it's somebody's cup, all right, maybe you have a cup like this, a coffee mug or something. It's something that only Joseph would use, and everybody knew it was Joseph's cup. Maybe it even had his name and diamonds around it, right? And it was his, and he would use this cup. In Egyptian culture, they would use liquid as a witchcraft, as divination, right? Joseph, as a godly man, would not have done that, but everyone would have known this was Joseph's cup. He's setting them up. He's wanting an outcome, but he's wanting to see how the brothers are going to respond to it. Well, they do respond. Look at verse 6. When he overtook them, that's the steward, he spoke to them these words. They said, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found in the mouths of our sacks, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? Whichever your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants. All right, here's how the brothers respond to him. Man, we would never do that. Don't you remember the last time we came here? You put the money ended up back in our wallets. And what did we do? We brought back double, because we didn't want you to think we would ever take from you. We're different now. We apologize to you. We're sorry. And we'll prove it to you that we wouldn't steal from you. Listen, if any one of us has taken something from you, you can just go ahead and kill them, and the rest of us will be servants. All right? Listen to me. Bad negotiation tactic, okay? All right, when you're negotiating, don't start with the worst, okay? All right, these guys are bad negotiators. But the servant thinks that's a great idea because he says, Verse 10, let it be as you say. All right, that's a good idea, guys. We'll just kill whoever has it, and we'll take the rest of you to be slaves. He who is found with it will be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent. All right, he changes it up. We'll just keep the one that has it. All right, now what does Joseph want? Benjamin. All right, Joseph wants his brother. Okay, he doesn't care about the rest. He wants his brother. Then each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. All right, now why is it significant that it's in Benjamin's wallet, basically? Well, who is Benjamin? Benjamin is Joseph's only blood brother, okay? It's his only full blood brother. And when Jacob thought Joseph was dead, Benjamin became the new favorite brother. Essentially, Benjamin took the place of Joseph in the family. By the way, the point of that whole story was don't play favorites with your kids. Don't play favorites with your kids. My mom and I were just having this conversation yesterday. She's like, what if it just kind of seems like favoritism because you like one kid more than the other? I was like, that's favoritism, right? That's like the definition of favoritism. One is bad, the other one's not so bad, and you like the one that doesn't give you nightmares, right? But they're your children, and you love them because God gave them to you as gifts. Favoritism is evil. But Jacob loved Benjamin. And he loved him so much, you remember that he didn't want Benjamin to travel down to Egypt, right? He told 10 of his sons, go down to Egypt. I don't care what happens to you. We're going to die if you don't go. But Benjamin's going to stay here because I don't want anything to happen to him. Like, being imprisoned or killed for theft. I don't want anything bad to happen to him. But Joseph is wanting to take Benjamin, and here's why, all right? We're not told yet, but here's why. Joseph wants to see how the brothers will respond to having a brother taken from them and enslaved. All right, why do you think Joseph would want to see how they respond? Well, how did they respond with their first brother that was taken away and enslaved? At first, they can care less. And so Joseph really wants to see if these guys, if their hearts have been changed. And so look how they respond, verse 13. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. So they went back to Egypt. And when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there, and they fell before him to the ground. All right, how did they respond when they knew that their brother was going to be taken? Did they just let him go? Did they let the steward just take Benjamin and go back? No. They all went with him. They all went back to Egypt, and they were so much in anguish and in passionate against what was going on that they ripped their clothes. All right, I was trying to think of a good 21st century version of this, and I honestly think the best thing I could think of is a broken phone screen. How many of you have broken your phone screen in a moment of passion? Let's just be honest. All right, some of you are too scared to raise your hand. All right, maybe you're not angry, but you're just upset about something, and you dropped your phone, or you threw your phone, or you hit your phone on something. All right, let's be honest. Who's done it? Man, we're not having church this morning. All right, because a lot of you are smiling and look. I could see you, right? I could see you smiling. I could see you looking. All right, maybe I should have you pull out your phone and hold it up right now, because I wonder how many are broken, right? I remember this happened to me. I'll just be honest with you. I was sitting in my car. This is back in, I think, 2009. It was like right as we were moving back up here. And I was sitting in the car. I was waiting for Faith, and I got a phone call, and it was from a friend of mine. His mom called me, and his mom said, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but Matt, my friend Matt, he died. And I said, man, Matt died. He's 26 years old. What did he die? And she went on to tell me how he ended up getting addicted to drugs and had a lot of things going on in his life, and he had a heart attack. And I remember I was still on the phone with her, and I was just so overcome with passion and anger and hatred for death and sin and I just smashed my phone on the steering wheel. And then I realized I had not ended the call with his mom. And so I was like trying to talk, but it was just completely broken. And I had just gotten the phone, and I was so upset. I was so upset over what was going on that it just, you just almost have this emotion inside of you that just has to come out. It has to be shown. And that's what the brothers are doing. They're so upset that they just rip their clothes. And they go back to Joseph and they fall before him. Completely, I think the word here would be broken. These guys are broken. Verse 15, Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" And Joseph's playing the part of Egyptian. He's basically saying to them, "Don't you know that I would find out? Why would you steal from me? You know that I was going to find out. A man of my power, man, I got silver cups with magical powers, bro. I can find you. I can find you and I can know what's going on." Well, how are the brothers going to respond? Well, Judah, the big brother, the heir to the promise of God, the leader of the family, he steps forward in what will be the longest speech in the book of Genesis. All right, we're going to get to it in a second, but he starts by saying this in verse 16. "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak, or how can we clear ourselves?" You know what he says? Joseph. He doesn't know it's Joseph, but he just says, "I got nothing. I got no excuses. I got no justification. I got no explanations for how this can happen. I just know that we are not guilty of this. God has found out the guilt of your servants, and behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found." Judah says, it's kind of funny. You see, all of us brothers, we're guilty. We're broken. We're sinners. We've done a lot of bad things, and I could go on and tell you all the bad things that we've done, the ways that we have failed, the ways that we are not perfect. I can go on and on and on, and God knows how guilty we are. But we have not stolen your cup. But even though we have not stolen your cup, we are still guilty. That's a confession. Judah is admitting his guilt before God and before Joseph. Verse 17, but he, Joseph, said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." You know, Judah says to him, "Not all of you are guilty. I understand that, but only Benjamin had the cup. Benjamin's the only one I want. You guys are free to go." He's trying to see if Judah will say, "Oh, okay, I know I'm guilty, but you're telling me I'm innocent now, and I could go. I'm free to go. You just want Benjamin." In other words, he's saying the consequences of all their decisions are going to be passed to Benjamin, and then they're free to go. But that's not what Judah does. Verse 18, again, this is the longest speech from one person, a monologue from one person in the entire book of Genesis. And in my opinion, it's one of the most beautiful, honest, heartfelt confessions that I think you and I can learn a lot from, because I think when it comes to confessing and to admitting guilt, that you and I were a little bit hesitant to be vulnerable, to be honest about our own sin and failure, and yet here Judah does it. Verse 18, then Judah went up to him. This idea that Judah got in Joseph's face, he got close to him. And he said this, "Oh, my Lord, Please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servant, saying, Have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, The boy cannot leave his father, for if he shall leave his father would die. And then you said to your servants, Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face. In other words, Judah saying, You wanted to see my brother, Benjamin. Our father wouldn't let us bring him down, but you said that we couldn't come back down unless we brought him with. So, verse 24, when we went back to your servant my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, Go again, buy us a little food, we said, We cannot go down if our youngest brother goes with us. Then we will go down. For we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. Now, how hurtful would that be? All right, who's Jacob talking to? He's talking to 10 of his sons, and he says, You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, Surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol. He says, Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servant will bring down the gray hairs of your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety before the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Who's speaking there? Judah, who made a pledge for his own life in place of the life of his brother. Judah, it's amazing, is willing to lay down for the life of his brother for the sake of his father, who is playing favorites. But it's no different here, verse 33. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boys go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that it would find my father. Judah, the bad and broken man, the guilty man, he was guilty of so many things, and he admitted his guilt before God. Remember, Judah betrayed his brother. He sold him into slavery. Judah defied his father and his faith by leaving the land of Canaan. He moved away. He married an unbelieving woman. He was such a horrible father, and he raised such horrible sons that his sons were so evil that God decided to just wipe them out. He was a horrible father-in-law who, after the death of his own wife, got drunk and slept with his daughter-in-law Tamar and got her pregnant, and he slept with her because he thought she was a prostitute. He's a bad and guilty man, but here he has been changed by God. We're seeing a very different Judah in Genesis 44 than we've ever seen before. We have to ask ourselves, what changed in Judah? What can take a guilty, selfish, bad, and broken man and turn him into a leader who's willing to give up his life for the sake of his brother, for the sake of his father, who is mistreating him, who is not loving him, who is not caring for him? What has changed in Judah's life? Well, it's not so much what has changed, but who has changed. You see, God changed Judah's life. God changed Judah's life. Church family, we have to believe that God can change lives. We have to believe that God can take people and change them, right? Because Christians are changed people. I just read, Garrett, you just amen from the hallway. I love that, brother. Thank you so much. Garrett's with me and he's back there, all right? I need you with me. We have to believe this. We have to believe that God can change people. Pastor Doug Logan, he wrote this book called On the Block, and it's a wonderful, tremendous book. And he's a pastor in Camden, New Jersey, and he wrote this. He wrote, "Our Lord has a long history of turning broken people into useful and beautiful vessels let me say it again. Into useful and beautiful vessels of His mercy." Our Lord has a long history of turning broken people into useful and beautiful vessels of His mercy. Do you want to know why Judah was so free, so vulnerable, so honest about his own guilt? Because he knows where he confesses, God brings restoration. That if we are not willing to be honest about being broken people, we will not experience the restoration and change that God promises. See, Judah no longer cares only about himself, but he cares about his father. He cares about his brothers. And he says, "I'm sorry. I have failed as a son. I have failed as a brother. I failed as a husband and as a father. In every single area of my life, I am a failure. I've made a lot of mistakes, and even more, I have sinned against a lot of people. I'm a wreck. I'm broken. But please, please, I'm begging you, do not take my brother. It will kill my dad. It will break his heart, and I can't disappoint him again. I won't sin against my dad anymore. I'm tired of failing. I'm tired of running. I've been changed by God, and I want to make it right." That's Judah's heart, and it's just pouring out to his brother Joseph. Judah substitutes himself in the place of his brother Benjamin. He looks at Joseph and he tells Joseph, "Listen, whatever you were going to do to him, whatever you were going to do to Benjamin, do that to me instead. If you were going to imprison him, then imprison me. If you were going to punish him, then punish me. If you were going to enslave him in your house, enslave me in your house instead. If you were even going to kill him, kill me." Joseph can't contain himself anymore. In verse 1 of chapter 45, Joseph could not control himself before all who stood by him. He cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." All right, get out of here. I'm about to cry. Right? So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Right? Joseph just loses it after he hears his brother say these things, and he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Everybody in the house heard it. They heard Joseph crying, and Joseph said to his brothers. Now, what would you say? 21 years, over a decade in the clink because of your brothers falsely accused. These guys brought so much hurt and pain and betrayal into their life. Up to this point, they didn't know that it was Joseph. Joseph now can finally say what he wants to say. What would you say? Aha! Right? It's me. It's Joseph. You thought you killed me. You thought you enslaved me. Look at me now. Who has the power now? Who's bowing down now? Who needs who now? Do you know what you've done to me? Do you know what you cost me? Do you know how much you hurt me? Why did you do it? Why did it take you starving in Canaan to finally come down and come looking? Joseph had 20 years to think about what he was going to say, what he was going to ask, if he was going to throw it back in their face, if he was going to want a better explanation. But this is not what Joseph does. Verse 3, Joseph says, I am Joseph. Is my father alive? All right, seems like a weird question, right? Last night we were watching the Cubs game. I don't want to keep talking about this because I'm not a fan, but I'm going to bring it up because I was just so baffled by it. We have had 75 years to come up with good questions for players who got the Cubs into the World Series. And last night, if you were watching the game, after the game, they went to Bryant, they went to Rizzo, they went to, I don't even know who else. They went to all these players, and they were like, how do you feel? And I'm like, really? After 71 years, 75 years, this is the question you came up with? Like, we couldn't think of something better? They're like, what do you think of the GOAT? Like, nobody cares about the GOAT. The GOAT's dead, right? We've had a long time to think about this, and this is the question you come up with. How do you feel? Well, how do you think he feels? Do you think he's sad? Right? There's better questions. Joseph, it almost seems like he just says, is my dad alive? And that's a decent question, but it's like, Joseph, really? You couldn't think of anything better than that? But it shows us where Joseph's heart is, doesn't it? In the moment that Joseph could have used to enact revenge against his brothers, he uses it as an opportunity to find about the well-being and welfare of his father. I mean, who's Joseph thinking about? Come on, talk to me, church family. Who's he thinking about? His family? He's thinking about his father. He's not thinking about revenge. He's not thinking about pride. He's not thinking about anything else. He's just thinking about his dad. He just wants to know if his dad's okay and if everything is going to be okay. You see, when you turn your thoughts away from yourself and to God, a desire for vengeance or pride is replaced with a passion for peace. Joseph's thoughts were just enamored by who God is and all that he's done, so much so that it led him to want peace with his brothers and not revenge. So he says, I am Joseph. I love this. Verse 3. But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed by his presence. And you'd be blown away too, I think. And so they don't know how they're supposed to feel right now, right? They're confused. Their brother, who they thought they was dead, their brother who was only in Egypt because they betrayed him, is now alive, is in the position to kill them, and they don't know how to feel. They don't know where they stand. It gets worse because Joseph says to his brothers, he sees that they feel kind of awkward and don't know where it's at, and he says, come, what does he say? Come near to me, please, all right? Now, if you're honest, right, and you are Joseph's brothers, what are you thinking in this moment? Why? Why do you want me to come close to you? Are you going to kill me? Are you going to arrest me? Like, what is this good, right? It's kind of like, this reminds me of when growing up, when my mom would say, hey, come here for a minute, right? And you hear that tone, right? And you're like, in the other room, like, why, right? What do you need? And you don't want to cross that door line, right? And you try to stay outside of arm's length, right? Outside of the smacking range, right? So you come into the room, and you know smacking range is about here, so you're going to stand right here, right? You're going to stay out of the room. Now, the problem for me was I grew up in a half Mexican household, and so the chancla range is in unlimited range. It can turn corners. If you don't know what that is, it's a sandal that mothers would use to smack everybody. And I literally have seen my mother knock out a friend of mine with a shoe. Not lying, no joke. He's got the scar to prove it. Literally, he hit her and ran away, and she threw her shoe, and he was out cold. And so the brothers, they don't want to get close because they don't know where they stand. They don't know that Joseph has forgiven them. They don't know that there is reconciliation, and so they're hesitant to approach him. I wonder, I don't want to jump too far ahead quite yet, but I wonder how many of us, if Jesus drew you near, if he said, come near to me right now in this moment, how many of you would be hesitant? Jesus, what do you want with me? Jesus, I've done a lot of bad things. I'm kind of scared to get close to you because I don't know what will happen. Joseph, he's wanting to comfort his brothers. Maybe some of you would say, if Jesus called me near, I would be so comforted by that. And that's what Joseph's wanting to do for his brothers. He's wanting to comfort them. So he's going to explain to them the bigger picture of what's going on. He may be the younger brother, but he is far more mature in the faith than his brothers. Look at verse 4. So they came near, and he said to them, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. All right? Does he let him go? No. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. All right? Who sold him there? The brothers, right? He says, you sold me here. But look what he says next. For God sent me before you to preserve your life. Now you sold me here, but who sent me here? God. You sold me here. I am here because of you, but I am ultimately here because God wanted me to be here. Verse 6, for the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. All right? So Joseph is now repeating the covenant promise that God made to Abraham that he would keep a remnant of faith. That out of all the people in the world, that there were just going to be a few who would believe. And it was through that few that God was going to bring the nation of Israel and the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And so Joseph is a believer. He's trusting God's promise. And he sees the bigger picture that though there's so much brokenness, so much hurt, so much evil going on around, that God is up to something bigger. And that God ultimately has not lost control. And he realizes that, and he says in verse 8, so it was not you who sent me here, but God. And I didn't understand that until now, that it was you who sold me, but ultimately God had a purpose for that evil. God was going to use this for something good, and he sent me here, and he has made me the father to Pharaoh. All right, some suggest that that just means a new Pharaoh got into place, a much younger Pharaoh, and so Joseph was an older father-like figure to him. The point is all the same, that Joseph is the Lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. That so far in the book of Genesis, when people ran to Egypt, they were running out of a lack of faith in God, but now God was taking his servant down to Egypt to elevate him over Egypt, that ultimately all the nations of all the earth would bow down to the covenant promises of God. And here, Joseph comforts and reassures his brothers that God's sovereign plan is good. Now, he doesn't excuse their sin, right? But he shows them that God can work and overrule even the evil intentions of others. I don't know about you, but that gives me hope. That no matter how many times I blow it in my life, so many times I fail or I sin, that God can ultimately overcome and overrule and get his purposes accomplished. That no matter how much evil comes against me or against you, that ultimately God is sovereign and he can overrule, and he has a much bigger and stronger plan. Joseph has this divine perspective, and I love it because divine perspective, seeing things from God's eyes as Joseph is here, divine perspective delivers us from debilitating problems. It's easy to get paralyzed by looking at the things around us, but when you look at them from God's perspective, you see that he can work all things for his glory and for our good. And so Joseph chose to see his own suffering at the hands of his brothers from God's perspective, God's eyes. And God took Joseph's mess and the mess in his life, and he turned it into a ministry opportunity for Joseph. And he bonded these brothers through the brokenness that they were experiencing. And so we see reconciliation now, but there's still someone missing from the equation. Look at verse 9. Joseph tells him, "Hurry up and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me the Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not tarry, do not wait.'" Right? "You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty." All right, I love this. Joseph comforts his brothers, and he not only comforts them with his forgiveness, but he comforts them with his provision. All right, he not only says, "I forgive you," but he says things are going to be really well between us. Things are going to be good. He says, "Go and get Dad," because there's still hard times coming, right? There's still broken circumstances around us. There's still difficulty going on around us, but things between us are now good. You remember last week when I said you could have something in your life where maybe everything else around you is going good. It's going good at church. It's going good at work. It's going good at home. Everything's good. But if you have one relationship that's off, it's kind of like a rock in your shoe. And one thing has the potential to throw off everything. Now what Joseph's saying is, the rock is out of my shoe, and I don't care if everything else crumbles. We're good now. We're good. And things are going to be great. I've forgiven you. Now I want to bless you. Now, church family, don't you love when somebody reassures you that you are forgiven? Have you ever went to somebody and you said, "You know what, I really need you to forgive me," and they say, "You know what, I just want you to know, I understand. I mean, it stinks that this happened, but I forgive you. I forgive you, and I mean it." Isn't that good? Isn't that good? Isn't it better, though, when they not only say that, but they show you? Not only do they say, "Hey, things are good between us," but they show you, they demonstrate it, that things are good. Like you sin against somebody, you confess to them, you ask them for forgiveness, and they say, "I forgive you." And the next day they buy you a cake, and you're like, right? You're like Joseph's brothers, like, "Man, I need a cupbearer," right? I need someone to taste this to make sure it's not like poisoned. But it's nice. It's nice when people not only reassure you, but they show you that you are forgiven. And that's what Joseph's doing here. He's saying, "I don't not only forgive you, I want to bless you. I want to see good happen to you." So Christians, I think this is it's a challenge, and it's a challenge even, as I'm thinking about my own life and when I've forgiven other people. I think Christians, we have a responsibility to not only forgive other people, but to go out of our way to bless and to do good to others. Why? What would motivate us to do that? Because like Judah, we understand that we are guilty people. But that God has forgiven us. And not only has He forgiven us, but He's shown us and blessed us. And we don't deserve that. It's called grace. And it's a grace that God extends to us and that we are called to extend to others. And Joseph does this to his brothers. And he goes on, verse 12, "And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you." All right? You know it's me because I mentioned Dad's name, and I know where you live, and now you know. "So you must tell my father of all my honor in Egypt and of all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here." And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. And after that his brothers talked with him. All right, I love this. It's just a picture of reconciliation where things are good now. They're crying. They're excited to see each other. And Joseph kisses them, and that's just kind of the seal of forgiveness. It's the seal of reconciliation. Things are absolutely good between us. And I love it. It just simply says that the brothers talked with him. All right, wouldn't you love to hear that conversation? Wouldn't you love to be a fly in the wall of just hearing the kinds of things that they talked about? I just picture the brothers like, "Dude, you shaved your beard." Like, what happened, man? Look at this Egyptian clothes, right? What's wrong with you? Did you get a tan, right? Or did you use that same orange stuff that like Donald Trump uses, right? Because he's different now, right? He looks different. They didn't even recognize him. But they're talking and they're enjoying fellowship and they're enjoying company. So much so, verse 16, when a report came, when the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers had come, it pleased Pharaoh and his servants, all right? Pharaoh's happy for him. The non-Christians are blessed by the presence and unity and joy of the Christians. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts, and go back to the land of Canaan. And take your father and your households, and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. We're going to talk about Goshen in a couple weeks. It's really cool what God did, and it's really interesting. So they're going to land in the land of Goshen, a part of Egypt. Take your fathers and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. Verse 19. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say this, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. You know what he's saying here? You know what Pharaoh is saying to Joseph? Tell your brothers and tell your father to not worry about bringing any of their stuff. Don't bring anything from Canaan. Leave it all behind. Why? Why? Because what you're getting is better than what you got. I'm about to bless you in a way that you're not going to hold on to those things that you want to hold on to. It's going to give you above and beyond. So the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each and all of them he changed of clothes, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. All right, so he blesses them. The very ones who cursed him and betrayed him, he blesses them. All right, they stripped him naked. What does he do? He clothes them. They abandoned him. He invites them in. They left him to die, and he provides for them the best food, the best home. I love this. Charles Spurgeon said of this verse right here, he said, far greater still is the contrast of our ungenerous treatment of the Lord Jesus Christ and his bountiful return of grace to us. To his father he sent as follows, 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his father's journey. All right? Man, he's just blessing and blessing. Like Oprah's got nothing on him, right? He's like, you get a donkey, you get a donkey, you get 10 donkeys, right? He's just giving it all to them. He's blessing them. And then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, do not quarrel on the way. All right, go home and get dad. On the way to get dad, don't fight. Now, it's interesting. Why would Joseph say that? Why would Joseph tell the brothers not to fight on the way back to Canaan? Well, who are they going to get? Jacob, their dad. What are they going to have to tell him? Joseph's alive. Now, you see, on the way home, it could be very easy to be like, well, Judah, you're going to tell him. You're going to take the blame. You know Reuben's saying that, because Reuben all along has been like, hey, I didn't want to kill him. I didn't want to throw him in that pit. Joseph's saying, listen, it's all good. Listen, there's good things that happen when people are honest about their sin. In church family, we need to have a place where we can be honest about our sin and our failure and our struggle. Because there's freedom there. There's forgiveness there. There's reconciliation there. And so they're going to have to go tell their father. And so one final test, because the brothers have to decide, are they going to be honest? Are they going to confess their sin? Or are they going to lie? Verse 25, so they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Dad, you won't believe it. It's a miracle. Joseph is alive. He must have beat off that wild animal and maybe hit his head because he forgot that he's from here and he ended up in Egypt and now he thinks he's, Pharaoh's father. He's going kind of cuckoo, but it's a Christmas miracle. He's alive. We could take you to him. Right? Is that what they say? Are they going to minimize it? Are they going to justify it? No, they're going to be honest. Joseph is still alive, and he is the ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart, that's Jacob's heart, became numb, for he did not believe them. All right, can we blame Jacob for not believing them? Probably not. These aren't the greatest sons. Besides, isn't it far easier to believe bad news when things are going bad? I think about your life. When things are going bad, isn't it easier to believe bad news? You know it is, because we have a phrase that when it rains, it pours. We've all said that. How are things going? And next week, right? Right? It just gets worse. It's really hard to believe good things when bad things are happening. And so we can understand why Jacob is reluctant here, right? It's hard to see the good in the bad. But verse 27, when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob was revived. And Israel, you notice that shift there? Jacob, who is also called Israel, and now Israel, the man of faith, the father of faith, said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die." I love that. Israel, the man of faith, says, you know what? I don't need the wagons. I don't need the donkeys. I don't need the stuff. I don't even need Egypt. I just want my son. And his presence is enough that I don't need anything else. Next week, we're going to look at Joseph and Jacob's reunion. But for now, I want to look at the restoration that's begun in this family. And we've been studying for the last few weeks the brokenness inside of this family. We have to wonder, how can the broken pieces of this family possibly put that back together? How could this go from utterly hopeless to amazingly blissful? How can things go from terribly broken to now completely whole, where things were so bad, but now they're so good? Here's why. Because their God is Jesus Christ. And they're now living as Jesus lives. You see, Judah, the big brother, left his home and stepped forward as the self-sacrificing substitute on behalf of his brothers. And Jesus would do the same, where he would leave the glory of heaven to come here, to come into the mess. And Jesus stands before God the Father, the very God whom we rebelled against, who we sinned against, whose wrath hangs above us. And Jesus looks at the Father just as Judah looked to Joseph. And Jesus says, listen, whatever you were going to do to them, do it to me. If you were going to punish them, punish me. If you were going to make them suffer for their sin, make me suffer. If you were going to make them endure hell, put it on me. If you were going to make them die, I'll die for them. Just let them go. And Jesus bears the sin of man on the cross. He dies and he rises from the dead 3 days later and looks at us and he says, listen, I will forgive you. I paid your price. I died your death. Now confess your sin. Be honest about your struggle. Be honest about your failure. Be open. Trust me. Follow me. Die to yourself. Live for me. Jesus says to you, I love you, so leave it all behind, because what I have is better than what you got. Judah, in a small way, shows us what Jesus has done for us. In a moment, we're going to take a time of response to respond to Jesus coming to us. Responding to Jesus dying for us. Celebrating Jesus' resurrection and what his death and resurrection means for us today. That if we are honest about our sin, that if we confess them before God and confess them before each other, that God not only forgives us, but he restores us. He not only lets things go, but he changes us. Gives us a hope and a future. But we have to remember that that does not happen without Jesus Christ paying the price on our behalf. So on the night when he was betrayed, he had a meal with his disciples. And at the meal, he prayed and he gave thanks, and he broke the bread, and he told his disciples, every time you take this meal, and you break the bread, when you have the bread, this is my body. Essentially what Jesus is saying, this is what I went through for you. The pain that you have, the suffering that you're going through, all of that was poured out on me. So every time you eat of this bread, think about that. Think about what Jesus has done for you. In the same way, he took the cup, which is the cup of the new covenant, the new promise, the ultimate promise. He gave thanks, and he said, this is my blood that was shed for you. Every time you take of the cup, remember me. And Jesus gives this picture in the cup of God's wrath that is meant for us, that is ultimately poured out on him when his blood was shed on the cross. So we have to not only think about the suffering and the pain that Jesus experienced for us, but ultimately the spiritual weight of God forsaking him because we were forsaken. That Jesus looked to the Father and said, my God, why have you forsaken me? He did that so you and I, who are forsaken, can be accepted. This meal, we celebrate it as believers in Jesus Christ. And so this meal is reserved only for those who have trusted Jesus Christ. So I want to invite you, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, to spend some time in prayer, maybe confess your sin, maybe ask yourself, have I been demonstrating this same love and reconciliation and grace that God has shown to me? Am I showing it to others? Would I have done what Joseph has done? Would I have stepped up as Judah stepped up? Would I have lived the way that Jesus lived? And believer, here's the good news. Your need is the same need that we all have, and that's Jesus Christ. This is why we confess. This is why we trust. If you're here and you'd say, you know what, I'm not a Christian and I really don't want to be a Christian, I have no interest in being a Christian, then I have to be honest with you, this meal is not for you. You know, there was another one at the table. A man named Judas who did not believe Jesus, he did not trust Jesus, and ultimately he betrayed him. And God's wrath hung over Judas's head, and Judas felt the weight of guilt and shame for his sin, but he didn't take it to God. He took it to a tree, and he paid for his own sin. You need to know that if you love your sin and you hate God, then you cannot be part of his kingdom. But God is a good, gracious God who loves us despite our sin, who loves us and invites us. No matter how much we rebel, no matter how much we run from him, he is a good and gracious God. That though this meal might not be for you yet, God's kingdom is. And you can repent and confess your sin and trust Jesus, maybe even today, and then come and enjoy this meal together. Let's move into a time of prayer. And as you pray, just confess your sin to God. And when you're ready, you could come and take this meal. Confess your sin, confess your Savior, and let's celebrate what Jesus has done for us.